That is such a particularly wonderful one. And I get to say that because Angie Carter is on the board of the Science and Environmental Health Network, which is the fiscal sponsor for the Pipeline Coalition. And so Angie is really one of the reasons that I got involved with the coalition at all. So did the river sing today? How many of you were on the river? Did the river sing? Do you remember the sounds? Do you remember the snake and its splash? Did you see fish? Can we make some of the sounds that you heard on the river as the river song? Let's make them together. Make a sound of the river and join in. Let's make a chorus of the river. To your trilling. Make those sounds of a splash. Oh, yes. Yes. The flying of the wings. All of it. The river has its own song. The river has its own song. And I'm a lawyer for future generations. My clients are future generations. I had a dream about what the law is, about what justice is. I dreamed that the tree of life holds the scales of justice. Imagine that the river waters those roots of the tree of justice and sings that song. Why is song so important? We can talk about what law is. For people that I love dearly from North Dakota, an indigenous tribe, they say that the law is song. That the law is song. The river has her own song. The river sings her own justice. The river sings her own justice. We talk about the law as the set of rules a community agrees to be bound by. That's how I understand the law. That's why we stop at a stop sign. That's why you go to jail if you hit somebody when you're drunk driving. Because those are the rules we agreed to be bound by. Who is in our community? Is the river part of our community? Is that great blue heron part of our community? Is the snake part of the community? Are the turtles part of our community or not? Do they have a say in the law and in justice? Let me tell you what environmental law is. It is free market private property law. There are really only two kinds of law in the United States. There's rights law. I have a right to own a gun, and I have a greater right to own a gun than I do to breathe clean air and drink clean water. I have a right to practice my religion, and I have a right to free speech, but I do not have a right to be born unpolluted as a baby. Because we buy and sell the rights to pollute that river, that treasured, precious river that has its own song. It has its own song. And so, when we talk about shifting environmental law out of free market private property law, I do move all over, I'm so sorry. If we move environmental law out of free market private property law and into rights law, what would it look like? I said, I am a lawyer for future generations, and I have been working with the Indigenous Environmental Network and others to create the legal framework to assert the rights of future generations, to say that they have a right to inherit a habitable planet. Others of my colleagues have talked about having nature. Nature has rights. Those are rights that go together, don't they? That it's really the right of the river, it's the right of the future generations of the great blue heron to the river, and then we start changing it out of free market private property law. We start talking about the rights that we hold with each other, not a right to. I hold a right with you, and with the great blue heron, and with the river, to a clean and healthy environment. We have shifted things out of free market private property law in the past and into rights law. We ended slavery. Slavery was great for the economy. I have to tell you, slavery was great for the economy. And we did not transfer title from a person to themselves. So if you had been a slave, we did not give you your own title to your body so you could buy and sell yourself. We said, people are not going to be part of free market private property law. It's not going to be part of property law. So the language that's being built into things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is that they have a right with the air environment, the river, the polar bear. So the place, the people and place go together. You and I are standing in the most damaged state of the Union. What is our responsibility with each other, to the members of our community, to the river, and to those other beings that you saw and adored on that river today? What are they? I want to close by being the voice of the river. You gave voice to the river earlier. And I'm going to read you the rights of the river, and I'm going to invite you to say a paraphrase of a quote of a line from a poem by William Stafford, one of my loved and adored poets. And what I'm going to ask you to say in a litany is what the river says, I say. And so I'm going to read you a line, and then I'm going to invite you to say this. This comes from a Declaration of the Rights of All Waters that the Women's Congress for Future Generations drafted 2 years ago. And there's also a corresponding list of human responsibilities that are really wonderful, because the corresponding aspect of law is if there's a right, there's an obligation and a responsibility to carry that out. And so if future generations in nature are going to have a right to a clean and healthy world, then we have the responsibility for that. And so, as rivers, I have a right to flow freely without impediment by dikes, dams, and human-made channels. What the river says, I say. To be honored for my natural rhythms of flooding and retraction.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to be clean and unpolluted.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to be in intimate relationship with the land and with time as a shaper of the earth.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to connect to other beings and bodies of the watershed, including the ocean.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to receive clean, unpolluted waters from the creeks, streams, tributaries, and rain clouds that feed me, and to give clean, unpolluted waters to the water bodies that I feed.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to maintain my natural and rightful temperature and levels.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have the right to be enlivened with sunlight and embraced by moonlight.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to support all the birds, fish, mammals, plants, and beings in the ecosystem around me.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to be recognized as beautiful, sacred, blessed, and life-giving.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to meander gently and to rush fiercely.
What the river says, I say.
As a river, I have a right to be protected as part of the commons in perpetuity.
What the river says, I say.
I want to end by saying the name of that river was the Skunk River. Whoa. That you were on. The Skunk River. There must be skunks on it. That small mammal that to me stands for the idea of respect. It stands for respect. The reason is because you don't get too close to it. You see a skunk, and let me tell you, you have more respect for that particular creature than you do for anyone else. Don't you?
Yep.
Several years ago, I came up with a new standard for law called the Respectful Person Standard. It was for offenses against dignity like sexual harassment law or defamation. It's in the Harvard Law Review, and you can go read it. But the point is, imagine if our relationships with the rivers were governed by respect. And where more to practice that than on the Skunk River? Thank you.